the categories. Okay, so some of these categories are fairly straightforward. I can see you don't really have to think too much about it. Best education and university category, I think it's kind of self-explanatory. Of course, during the COVID time, I saw quite a few fairly innovative new sites coming up, which are also relevant to education. I think even the site that won the silver award this time is a kind of an unusual website, which is training students to prepare for the fifth standard scholarship. So it doesn't have to be just a university or an institute, it can also be one of these kind of newer sites which are related to education. Yeah? E-commerce, again, fairly a strict definition. It has to, I mean, personally, I would say it has to have online payments. You have to be able to get onto that website, look at a catalog of products, and then do a shopping cart, and then check out and buy it in the credit card. Even if you don't make the payment online, maybe you have a payment on delivery, cash on delivery kind of a thing. So if it falls into that category, then it belongs in the e-commerce category. So I mean, these are not categories where it's that difficult to figure out whether your website should go into that particular category. Same with government websites. It doesn't have to be just a .gov.lk domain. If it is a government institute or a corporation, or I think that typically the armed forces websites compete every year and quite often get awards as well. So anything that is a government entity should go into this category. And I think one thing to note is also typically if it's a government website, it is required to be trilingual because that is the government's policy that all government sites should be able to communicate in all three official languages. Now this year there was a special category introduced because when you come to non-profit, earlier all of these sites were in one group, but this year BestWeb separated out a special category called CSR, and I think that was a good thing because CSR is typically done by a company which has a lot of resources, so they are able to spend more on a CSR website than your typical non-profit which has a much lower budget. So non-profit essentially is, I would say broadly you can categorize it as a charitable venture that has no profit motive. Best personal website also fairly straightforward. I think Johanni's site got an award, so that is a good example. It is typically the website for a person. So if that person is a celebrity or some kind of well-known personality, then they can market themselves through the website. Yeah. Small and medium. Now this I think is where some of the confusion arises. what belongs in the small and medium and what belongs in the corporate. So I think we can take both of these together. So typically I think what the BestWeb intends is the corporate side should be the very large company. So if it is a listed company on the Colombo Stock Exchange, then very easily you can say belongs in the corporate category. But it doesn't have to be listed. Now I think the site that won the gold award is a private company, but it is a very large company. So if you look at in terms of turnover, the companies that have a very high turnover and they are very large organizations go into corporate. I think Professor mentioned so there's a kind of a limit. So if it is below 500 million a year or something, it's given there. Sorry, 100 million, yeah. So then it goes in as a small and medium enterprise, right? Okay.
In fact,
yeah.
Feel that what three categories from the correct one, it suggests it will be 100 next year.
Sure. Yeah, small, of course, because I think 100 million is fairly reasonable. But now the medium enterprises may be earning more than that. So, and also the rupee has also devalued. So we might want to think about whether to adjust that at least to 200 million. But essentially that's the difference. So it's either goes into SME or into corporate if it is essentially a site which is intended to present the entity, right? So it is not doesn't belong in any one of the other categories like e-commerce or advertising. If the site is generally about presenting the organization, then it goes into one of these two categories. So CSR is a special category, and here generally it has to be something which is part of a, I mean, it's a non-profit initiative, but it is for a corporation. Right? So that's how you distinguish whether it should go into this category or into the non-profit. And then advertising and marketing, how you differentiate this is, I think typically if you're directly selling products on your website, you should go into the e-commerce category. But if you are not directly selling, but you are still trying to market or brand your products, then you can go into this advertising and marketing category. Sports, media, entertainment is a fairly a broad area. So all of the news websites, online radio, online TV, and then also other kind of entertainment sites. There are lots of them, music related, and then maybe certain other social and cultural stuff that can all go into sports, media, and entertainment. Travel and tourism also fairly straightforward because it is typically hotels or travel companies. But it can also be other websites which are promoting travel and tourism in the country. Similarly, with health and wellness, can be hospitals, but also can be all of these other things like spas and medical equipment and pharmacies and so on. Best banking and finance, good to have a separate category because I think these are unique. I mean, I think we didn't have this always. So, yeah, so
so it's actually finance, finance, insurance, all come under that.
okay. So maybe we want to update that as well and make sure that. Okay. Yeah. So typically, if you're a bank or a finance company, or as from the says insurance company, then we can insert it into this. So special categories, there are a couple of them. One of them is the most popular website. And then there is the best developer, and also overall winners are selected from the best websites out of each category. So generally, that's how you categorize. So it's important to enter your site into the correct category because quite I think frequently sites get submitted to a category which is not the best category for that site to be judged in. So sometimes that can hurt your chances in winning an award if you're in the wrong category. I think Jacinta does very hard work to try and move the sites that are miscategorized into the correct category, but then that just creates additional confusion, and it's best to avoid that right from the beginning. Okay, so let me move on to the criteria, judging criteria, and again, this is all given on the best website, so it is it's very easy to follow. So as a someone submitting a website for the best web competition, it's very easy to understand what you should do. It's all given here, and it is also broken down into different categories. So I think Jacinta sent me a long list of actual errors that the judges found in judging this time. And what I noticed is most of those fall into a few specific types of errors. I won't go through all of this, but I'll touch on a few. So pages should be complete, contact information should be there, up to date, and so on. So if you have a news section or you have a blog section, make sure that those items are up to date, right? So when you go to the news, if the last news item is from 5 years, copyright notice. I mean, it's a simple thing, but people forget to update the copyright notice in the footer, right? So if it says copyright 2020 and you are competing in 2023, you can get penalized if the judges are going to be very strict about it, right? So now search is important from this section about completeness. I think currently there shouldn't be any website that doesn't have a search function. There can be some very unusual website where you may not need it, but typically search is a key function. So always ensure you have it. Privacy and cookie policy, I think now has become standard, right? So this is coming from this whole Cambridge Analytica thing that happened a few years ago. So in the US and Europe now, it is law. If you have a website and it doesn't have a privacy policy and a cookie policy, you can even have legal problems, right? So Sri Lanka, I think still it is not a legal requirement, but to the extent that your website will be used by people coming in from the United States and the European Union and other countries that have these laws, it is better to have it. Because if you don't have it, then search engines and other ways of getting to your site may penalize you and your site may not get the traffic that it needs. Yeah. So in terms of navigation, I think the navigation section actually includes one of the key problems, which is broken links, right? And the judges have mentioned over and over, particularly the social media links were broken on a lot of sites that they were testing. So it's good to have the social media connected to your website, but make sure that they work, right? So, and this is really where the quality assurance comes in, right? People build websites and they don't really test them very well, right? So, and every kind of link. So it can be a menu link, it can be links inside the page, like a read more link or something like that. Or it's the social media icon, and when you click it, either it doesn't go to the social media page that's intended, or something else happens, right? And also it mentions HTTPS now. It still says particularly for e-commerce sites, but at this point, if your website doesn't have HTTPS, it shouldn't be on the web, right? Because HTTPS has been a standard for many years, and also Google really doesn't like websites that don't have HTTPS. So if you have a site that's just HTTP, I would be very surprised if you're having any kind of good search engine performance. Okay, then we go on to standards. Now W3C conformance is a more of an academic thing, right? The Google doesn't care. So even if your site has terrible W3C errors, it will still perform well on Google. So because what Google looks at is if the user experience is good, it's okay. But if you really want your code to be clean, it's good to also check your website for W3C, right? So now, unlike when we started BestWeb 13 years ago, I think, Professor, 13 or 14 years ago, there were not a lot of tools back then. So we had to do all of this manually, right? It was very labor intensive to check a website and make sure it met these standards. But now there are a lot of free tools available, right? There are tools available for W3C checking. There are tools available for broken link checking. You should really, I mean, it's not hard. Find the tool, put your website into it, and check and make sure that those errors are not there, right? So you really shouldn't be having things like broken links, because they're very easy to identify and fix. Your performance, basically, as one thing, loading time, really important. I think Google says for if you're a e-commerce website, for every 1 second that your site is delayed to load, you lose 7% of revenue, right? So particularly the websites that are making money, speed is sites. There is a very strong correlation between user engagement and speed. So if you have a very good site, it should load within less than 1 second. But I think when you look at the general Sri Lankan websites, 1 second is a very high standard. I will say at least 2 to 3 seconds, right? If it takes longer than that, then you're trying to do too much, let's say on the home page, right? The home page really shouldn't take more than 3 seconds to load. If it is taking too long, then reduce the size of whatever you have on the home page. Yeah? So design criteria, again, lots of things here. User friendliness, I think, is at the top, right? So now it is no longer just usability, now it's user experience as well. So, and that's a much more subtle area. So you should go through your site carefully. And again, there are tools, right? So there are automated tools which you can use to do a quick check, particularly if your website has hundreds of pages. Sometimes it's impossible for a human quality assurance person to go through all of those pages. So even things like spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, I mean, sometimes we discover you have pages with the dummy text, the lorem ipsum text is still there because your original theme or something had the lorem ipsum, and then you forget to check and remove those dummy pages. Yeah, so page design, again, I mean, this is where things get more subjective, but essentially, when you come to the website, if it looks nice, you feel good about it, then you've done most of your job.
Hi.
Right? So
Sorry,
in
can
terms
I
of,
ask a question?
colors and font selection and things like that. There's a great deal of flexibility for the designer to make those decisions. Ultimately, though, you're going to have an average user who is going to be using the website. Right? So somebody who has no expertise in web design, someone who may be not tech savvy, just as average person coming to the website because they're looking for the information or the services or the products that you're offering. So it's got to be usable for that person. And now I think mobile devices are the primary device. Maybe 60% of the website traffic is going to come from mobile. So designers are still very focused on the desktop. And there's a reason, because on the desktop, you can do all kinds of different designs, right? On mobile, it basically becomes elements one under the other. And so no matter how cool your website looks on desktop, when you get to the mobile, it all becomes very similar. So that's one of the challenges, right? How do you make your site stand out on a mobile device, right? And keep in mind, everyone has a different mobile device, right? The screen resolutions are different. I mean, now, of course, you're down to two operating systems. It's either Apple or Android. And on desktop, it is either Windows or Apple, right? So make sure that your website works on all of these. And again, you have plenty of tools available to simulate. You don't need to buy all the devices and test it physically. If you can, it is better. Right? The physical testing, I think, still is superior to simulated testing. So volume of content, of course, related to the category you're in. Right? So if it's a personal website, maybe doesn't need to have a lot of content, but if it's a corporate website, you're expected to have much more comprehensive information. Then of course accuracy, creativity, and multimedia and things like that. Now you have a lot of options, right? So it's a trade-off. How much multimedia can you put in without really making the site very slow and difficult to use on certain devices and so on. And if you got content writing and you got images being used, always ensure that you aim for the highest quality that your budget will allow, because those are the things that make a difference when people use your site. Interactivity, of course, there's a lot of flexibility in how you interpret that. So something like meaningful error handling means if you try to load a page that is not there on the website, it shouldn't give you the default 404 error. You should ideally design a error page and see if you say 404, no, I mean your average user doesn't know what that means, right? So it should say the page you're looking for is not found. Why don't you try one of these links and do something interesting, because that's also a page. You can do something in that page without just making it an error page. Yeah. So privacy and security, of course, I think security particularly is critical, because the first thing that happens when you submit the website to BestWeb is TechSite will go and check your site for security. If you don't pass the security test, you are disqualified. So, and I think that's fair, because nobody really wants to be interacting with a website that is not secure. And certainly you should not be giving awards to sites that are not secure. So there is a minimum standard of security that you need to meet. So when you're planning to enter your website to BestWeb, I would say the first thing to do is check the security. Right? So HTTPS is basic now. I think if you don't have HTTPS, you should not be allowed to compete. But check for the other things. Right? There are now the web is a very dangerous place. Right? People are constantly trying to exploit your website and do various things. Try and make it as safe as possible. So multilingual, I think there are two categories where it is required. Government and banking and finance. By law, your website should be multilingual. So make sure that your site meets those standards. But certain categories, I think English is sufficient. I mean, there are certain categories where I don't really see the purpose of having it in single and Tamil, because it doesn't make sense, right? So not every website needs to be multilingual. So it really depends on the category and what you're trying to achieve. So mobile optimization, as I mentioned, and keep in mind, the loading on your mobile device is going to be different from desktop, because on the desktop, you are probably on a broadband connection, you have wireless and route and so on. Mobile device, typically people have a data package, which tends to be a lot slower than your desktop connection. So mobile screens are smaller. So for example, why would you have a huge image that is intended for the desktop loading on the mobile device? Right? Think about it, because websites now have the capability of delivering a different image for mobile than for the desktop, even on the same page. Right? So those are the things that will really differentiate your site from kind of a typical cookie cutter. Somebody takes a theme and puts a few pictures and so on. Then there's a lot of bonus points as well given here. So I mean, actually, I noticed in one category, the chatbot was AI driven, and that site actually got the gold award in that category. I thought that was impressive because AI technology still hasn't really got to the stage where we can use it in mainstream applications, but they had managed to do it. So if you talk to the chatbot, it will actually talk to you like you're talking to a human user. So the innovative technology, of course, I think everyone needs Google Translate. So specifically, the judges were said if Google Translate is there, that's a negative point, because if you ever try to translate English into Sinhala or Tamil or the other way around, you know what a disaster that is. So you have to be careful about what kind of automated tools you use as well. And so then I guess comes to the penalty points. So copyright violations, avoid just grabbing pictures of the internet and using them. Unwanted content, and generally we don't like to see ads, right? So unless it's some kind of blog or something where you're making your income from that revenue, generally you should not have ads on your website. Yeah, so and then beyond this, of course, best to have a few rules as well. As Professor mentioned, the logo should always be present, because that's how we know that you are actively competing in the competition. So it's a fairly long list of criteria. I think some criteria are more important than others. So specifically, I think things like security are quite important. And then also elements which are broken or obviously not functioning correctly. So broken links, spelling mistakes, link, right? So, if it says about us and you click it and it takes you to the products, then definitely you are not going to be an award for that. So broadly, I think those are the categories. Professor, anything I need to touch on specifically?
I think you covered everything. So I just want to again highlight something. Say, I think about 80% of the problems we saw like this they have been fixed by using some kind of automated right? And that would be more broken in some side because that's not very good. And some people give very good within logos, but they don't know it. So the logo is even so can be done with tools, and if you have not taken the effort to do that, I think you are actually disrespecting our judges who have their own kind of right, but you have not taken the time to just allocate to us. So yes, there is quite a number of criteria, but this is nothing other than just saying. So other than that, there is only for BestWeb. These are ones to make you more customers. If your site is good for the road, you can say if it's good or not. Right? If somebody comes out and sees roads and they investment loan and that because your customer will know this. It's better with your Google or somebody else maybe do that. Because always get your customer. So if you do that, I think you are like 90% of the way through. It is small under 10%.
Okay, I think
I am yes, this category at the beginning. So please see where you get most chance to be. You may be able to become two different types. One is the part of the side, corporate, small and medium, personal, and so on. In any field, then we get the things according to the field, things that pricing marketing or whatever. So, some the advertising marketing and last, right? So it's competitive. If you go to corporate, not only you have certain number and large number, but those people have a lot of money, right? So there is no, if you don't have a huge budget, don't bother to go to corporate. If they competing into quite large budgets. Like that, think of it as okay, you can do here or here or here. But if I do this one, then you get the most chance. And if you are not sure, just speak to the center and we can advise you which one may be the best.